Well, hello everyone again. This is Louis Marinelli, the California Secessionist, with episode 3 of the new stream here, live stream on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook. So subscribe on Twitter, subscribe on Facebook to our campaign platforms. Also, you can find me personally on Instagram if you're interested in seeing baby pictures. Not really interesting. But anyway, I wanted to get back into the discussion going on around the country and the world about national divorce. It's a national conversation about national divorce, and it's great that it's taking place. Whatever the outcome, it's great that it's taking place. It's great that there's a national discussion, a national conversation about national divorce. And I bet you we're going to be using that word national many times in this and the future streams, live streams. Remember, this is live. And this is Louis Marinelli, California Secessionist, returning to California in less than 150 days to participate in the 2022 gubernatorial election, where we will defeat Gavin Newsom, remove him from office, and replace him with a candidate, with a governor who will be prepared to take California on the path to independence through Calexit, and who will be prepared to advocate for a national divorce between the states through Calexit. That candidate is me. My name is Louis Marinelli, running for governor in California, and we will provide the people of California with a real alternative this time. And I like to remind everyone all the time that in California, we have one-party rule by the Democrats, and the Republicans can't challenge that statewide. So it makes no sense to put a Republican up on the ballot against a Democrat. You're going to lose every time. And people vote for the Democrat, or the Democrats keep winning because there's no real alternative on the ballot. But if we put forth a candidate who's advocating national divorce, all of a sudden the election is not between just two candidates vying for political power in Sacramento, two personalities, or two political parties vying for political power in Sacramento. It'll be between two ideas. Do you want to have California remain a state, or do you want California to become a country? My candidacy represents that stark choice. That stark choice. And I use that word very selectively, and I know someone out there who might appreciate it. That we will be putting forth a stark choice and give the people of California a real option for change or status quo. And if you want status quo, if you want California to remain a state, you can vote for Gavin Newsom. But if you want California to pursue a completely different future as a nation, then I am your candidate, Louis Marinelli, the California Secessionist. 2022 gubernatorial election in California will be between a vote of statehood or nationhood. So let's keep our eyes peeled for that. It's coming up pretty soon. But for today, because 2022 is next year, I wanted to get it into the continued discussion going on around the country about national divorce. And again, today we have another, what can only be described as a coordinated attack on the idea. Because as my colleague Marcus Ruiz-Evans always says, first they laugh at you, and then they fight you, and then you win. Well, in September, we had people coming out in support of national divorce, and it was not taken so seriously. But the conversation began. But then when people started to actually show support for national divorce on both sides of the aisle, an area where actually there was common ground between the two sides of our political spectrum, all of a sudden that threatened the status quo. That threatened the establishment. And so now there's a coordinated attack out there to go out there and tell everybody why, national divorce is a crazy idea or why it's a terrible idea. We saw all these headlines before when Calexit got serious after the Trump election. There was also a coordinated effort by the corporate media to attack Calexit. The same headlines. Calexit's a terrible idea. Calexit's a bad idea. It's a stupid idea, blah, blah, blah. And now we have the same thing going on right now, national divorce. Although everyone seems to be on board, except for the experts and the political pundits. Everyone seems to be on board. regardless of that fact, it's a terrible idea. It's a stupid idea. It'll never work, blah, blah, blah. It's a coordinated effort to try to get people to relax before they really start investing their time and effort into making Calexit and making national divorce a real thing. And actually, it is a real thing, but to really make it and to develop it so that it can become a solution to our problems. So I want to get in today. There's an article from on the Daily Beast. A new author today comes out with his approach towards why we should stay together. Why the United States should stay together. But before we get into that, I'd like to remind people that I'm still waiting for that article, that one article where someone comes out against national divorce on the grounds of how great the union is, on the grounds of how great federalism works and how great our system of government works and serves the people. Because when these people come out in their coordinated attack against national divorce, they don't come out and talk about, well, we should stay together because the country's so great together and everything is so hunky-dory. And we should stay together because the system works and because we have faith in our institutions of government and because we have faith in our politicians and political leaders. And we should stay together because it's what's best for everybody. There is really no argument like that. I don't see any articles. They're all looking outward. I can't even count and remember how many are going on about, oh, Russia and China this, Russia and China that. It's impossible this, it's impossible that. But none of them. And today we'll see another example where an author comes out against national divorce and cannot put forth an argument about why the union should stay together just because the union is great and the union works and federalism works. That argument doesn't exist. That's why nobody takes that argument. And unless it would be a parody, it might be a parody out there where someone's talking about how great the country is in its current state of the union and how great the system works and how effective our government works. That would be a parody if someone were to write that article. Nobody could really do it with a straight face, which is why they start saying, well, we can't do it because Russia and China. We can't do it because of trade and we can't do it because of travel. But if you look at Europe, 44 countries, most of which living in peace as neighbors with free trade, free travel. They even have mutual defense agreements. In the European Union, they have NATO, which encompasses most of Europe. Czechoslovakia broke apart in 1993 through what's called the Velvet Divorce. Now that country is two countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, broke apart in 1993. They remain peaceful partners and neighbors today, and even they have a mutual defense agreement. And so there's nothing to say that when the American states break up through national divorce, that we also in North America can't have and continued peaceful, cordial relations between the states. And we can't have freedom of movement. Like in Europe, they have the Schengen region where everyone can freely move between the countries. I don't even think you need a passport anymore. I mean, I haven't personally done it, but from what I hear, in the Schengen region, you can just move between the countries as if it's one country, which was one of the arguments why people argued against Brexit, for example. But Calexit and Brexit are different. And they're similar in some contexts in that we were talking about breaking away, one political entity breaking away from a political union, whereas Brexit was the so-called secession of the UK from the European Union. Calexit is the secession of California from the American Union. But they're very different aside from that. But anyway, let's get on to the point. I want to get into the point because I want to talk about the Daily Beast article, and I want to show it to you on my screen. All right, so here it is. America, let's stay together, even if it's just for the kids. Even if it's just for the kids. Well, it's kind of a funny headline, I think, personally, because if you talk about people who are married in a bad marriage, couples that are in a bad marriage and they decide to stay together for the sake of the kids, I don't think it's universally a good thing. I mean, a lot of times children suffer as a result of the fact that their parents who hate each other, for the sake of the children, stay together in the same house. And so this idea right from the beginning, sorry, buddy, right from the beginning, your headline, even if it's just for the kids, maybe you're trying to be comical here, humorous or ironical. I don't know what it is, but if we want to take you for what your words say, let's stay together, America, even if it's just for the sake of the kids. Children often suffer when parents stay together for their sake. If parents hate each other, they're gonna express that content and that disappointment and hatred towards each other in the presence of the children. And they're going to often take it as their fault. So I think it's a high call to try to defend the argument that America should stay together, even if it's just for the proverbial children. That's just the headline. Let's get onto the rest of the article here, because there's other things that he talks about here. So national divorce, we have this great graphic here. Okay, great. It is opinion piece, so that's good. Now let's look at the subtitle here. Let people in different states make different choices about their values and how they'd like to be governed. Then stop being so concerned about what people elsewhere are doing. I agree. That sounds pretty great. So when I started reading this, I was like, well, look at this guy. This guy is on board. He gets the idea. Different states, different choices. That's what the system is supposed to be like. Where the people of California, the people of Texas can, govern their states according to the principles of federalism in the way that they see fit. And as a result of that, we can all live together in the same house. But that's not the way it works, unfortunately. In reality, that's not the way it works. We don't have a system where the people of California can do their thing and the people of Texas can do their thing, and we all accept that, as the author says here. Let's stay together, and we'll let the states make different choices about their different values, and then we stop being so concerned about what people elsewhere are doing. Well, how do we actually go about doing that? Because we do have, on so many levels now, everything is so nationalized. Even Senate elections are nationalized because the senators, for example, are going to, approve Supreme Court nominees to the Supreme Court for life term appointments to the Supreme Court. And so it's important to every state who gets elected as a senator from every state, because that senator or those two senators from that state are going to inevitably impact the composition of the Supreme Court and the composition of the cabinet, for example, which plays a lesser role, I think. But the bottom line is the Senate is a very nationalized body, just like the House of Representatives. Now, it wasn't designed that way. If we go back before, the 1900s, the senators were chosen by state legislatures. That was the way that the founding fathers set it up, to give the states an opportunity to have direct say in the composition of the federal government. But then we had the constitutional amendment that allowed for the direct vote of senators. Now, an argument can certainly be made in favor of, direct democracy or democracy, and that allowing people to vote for senators is a good thing. And I'm sure some people can make that argument, and I can understand it. But you can't deny the fact that it changed the federal system that was devised by the founding fathers, whereby the people had a direct say in who was elected to the House of Representatives every 2 years, and that the states, not the populations of the states, but the state legislatures, the state governments themselves had a say in the Senate. That was a beautiful system that was devised. But then we amended that system. And now we have a nationalized Senate, where even it's important, to people in California who the senators from Texas are. Because one senator, let's not forget, one senator can and has been and will continue to hold up legislation in the Senate through the filibuster. Now, whether you agree with that or not, it depends on who's the majority party, I guess, at the particular moment. Right now, the Democrats and the Republicans are 50-50. And so every vote matters. And if you're a Democrat right now, you might not be so much in favor of the filibuster. But not so long ago, the Democrats were in the minority and they were very protective of the filibuster. So it makes a lot of sense that people in California are not going to be able to, as the author says here, stop being so concerned about what people in other places are doing, because the people that they elect to the Senate are going to impact the people's lives in California and the other 49 other states. And so, again, this is Mr. Lewis. His name is Matt Lewis, the senior columnist at the Daily Beast. I think it's a little bit out of touch with reality so far, and we're only in the subtitle, and the article is a little out of touch with reality. It's a little idealistic. Now, I think it's kind of ironic for me to call somebody idealistic. I'm the founder of Calexit. I'm the person who has a very idealistic philosophy on things that we can do, because I believe, California can and should secede from the Union. I've been talking about it for years. And so for me to call somebody idealistic is kind of funny. But that just really speaks to how I think out of touch this author's text already is. And we're only in the subtitle. Let's continue. He goes on here and says, America is coming apart at the seams. America is coming apart at the seams. That's what the discussion about national divorce is all about. And there's just nothing else to say about that. I'm at a loss of words. So far it seems like for an article that's about staying together, I think Mr. Lewis here does a great job of laying the foundation to argue why the country should break apart. And we're only in the first sentence of the first paragraph. So yes, America is coming apart at the seams. We have so much division. And it's not just division, as I've spoken about, on some minute details of policy where there could be compromise about what the tax rate is going to be. Is it going to be 32%, 35%? Those kind of minute details of policy can be worked out. We can compromise on those. That those differences of opinion wouldn't be, America coming apart at the seams. Or as Abraham Lincoln said, house divided against itself cannot stand. Well, that proverbial house in which we live to this day is divided against itself. Now, not along the same lines as it was in the 1800s, which led up to the Civil War, but the house is certainly divided against itself, and it cannot stand in that condition. So America is coming apart at the seams. It is divided against itself. And I'm glad that the author at least recognizes that. And he gives some examples here. Senators are being hounded in bathrooms, talking about the Arizona senator. And airports are being left for pumping the brakes on the progressive spending bills. Meanwhile, parents and kids are being harassed by people on the right for wearing masks. Let's not forget that the parents and kids, our parents anyway, are also now being harassed by the federal government, or going to be harassed by the federal government for exercising their right to free speech at school board meetings, thanks to the Biden administration and the Justice Department going to unleash the policing power of the federal government on parents who simply want to go to school board meetings and express their views through free speech, are now going to be harassed by the federal government for standing up and exercising free speech. And then the author goes on here and says, seems like the only thing we can agree on these days is that there are now two Americas. This is, again, a continuing paragraph describing exactly why we need national divorce. So it's a pretty bad way to start an article if you're talking about why we should stay together. That's just my opinion. It's a beautiful article so far because it represents everything that we're talking about when we talk about why we need a national divorce, why we need Calexit, why Texas needs Texit, why New Hampshire needs to separate from the country if it wants to. Because the country is falling apart at the seams. And our divisions are so deep and so philosophical. And they can't be resolved by coming to the table to try to find some common ground. In order for us to find compromise on the issues that divide us, one side is going to have to, or perhaps both sides are going to have to compromise their values. And I don't think that we should have to live in a country where, in order to find compromise, we have to compromise our core values. Like I said, we're not talking about the percentage of a tax rate here. We're talking about core values between the left and the right are so diametrically opposed to one another that in order for there to meet any kind of compromise or meet common ground, they're going to have both sides compromise their value system. And first of all, I don't think that should be required. You shouldn't have to live in a country where you have to compromise your values simply so that government can work and that there can be tranquility in society. You shouldn't have to compromise your values for that. So America is coming apart at the seams. It is divided against itself, and it cannot stand. And I think that we need to recognize that. The author recognizes that. It's interesting why he thinks that we should stay together anyway. Let's see why. I'm sure he's going to get to it somewhere. According to a recent poll conducted by the University of Virginia's Center for Politics and Project Homefire, 4 in 10 of Biden and half of Trump voters at least somewhat agree that it's time to split the country. It's been a very highly publicized poll. It's been talked about everywhere. And it's very representative of the fact that the country is getting more and more divided. Okay, so we're still waiting for Mr. Lewis's argument about why the union should stay together. A national divorce is an idea that has a certain appeal to moderns who have grown accustomed to such temporary arrangements, is appealing to almost anyone who's given up on the American experiment. Well, what is the American experiment? And perhaps it's time for us to recognize the fact that sometimes experiments fail. I mean, we had almost 250 years to have this so-called American experiment. Maybe the American experiment is a failure. Or maybe it was a success for most of that time, but now, since it's coming apart at the seams, it's not meant to be some kind of eternal experiment that's going to last forever. I think it's maybe potentially necessary for us to just recognize that point. But he says here anyway, giving up on the American experiment. And unlike a bloody civil war, it's too messy and violent. Conscious uncoupling somehow sounds more civilized and sensible. But it's still a bad idea, and it can't and won't work. Okay, now we're going to get into this. Now we're going to get into the heart of it, why he thinks we should stay together. And there it is. You see it. Russia and China. Again. And he's actually quoting someone else. So they're just parroting each other's little talking points here. I talked about Rich Lowry a couple days ago. And so, as Mr. Lowry noted, Russia and China would be delighted and presumably believe that we deserve to experience the equivalent of a crack-up of the Soviet Union. I talked about that in the previous episode of the California episode because I actually directly addressed his article. And it's a fallacy there, so we're not going to get into that again. But then there's also the practical problem of who gets what in a divorce. Even in a TV sitcom where a house gets divided in half using masking tape, the problems immediately arise. Who gets the kitchen? Who gets the bathroom? Who gets what? That's okay. It's a fair question. It's a fair question. Who gets what? All right. Well, who gets what? Splitting up the assets and the debts. So the national divorce is going to result in some kind of a national divorce settlement where the terms of the divorce are going to be laid out and agreed upon by all parties. And in that settlement, we're obviously going to address splitting up the assets and sharing the debts. It's absolutely necessary that each state takes its share of the debts. You could do it, for example, on a per capita basis. Since California has 40 million people and Wyoming has 600 to 700,000 people, that obviously California would take a larger share of the national debt than Wyoming would. We can split up the assets in a similar way. I mean, each state in its own way has contributed to the growth of the United States and the success of its economy over the last couple of centuries. But it's also benefited from, federal government spending, which is now, brought us to debts over $25 trillion, over $26 trillion in debt now. Well, we've all benefited from that. And so because we've all benefited from that, we should all take a share of the debt. Yet because we all contributed to the success of the country, we should all split up the assets in some fair way. And I think that when we start moving forward with national divorce negotiations, that these conversations will take place and these decisions will be made and the people will agree upon a fair division of the assets and the debts in this country. I don't think it's as difficult as it sounds. Sure, it's not going to be easy. But also what's not going to be easy is for the next whatever amount of years you want to put into it, arguing and bickering and fighting about every single political topic of the day. And it's not going to be easy to have continuing to raise the debt ceiling every 3 or 4 months because we have a debt ceiling and we approach it very quickly, rapidly. And then it has to be risen. And then the party in the minority holds that as a piece of leverage to get some concessions from the party in the majority. And then the rest of the world thinks that the United States is going to go into default. Is that easy to do that every time? Every time. Are we going to keep doing that and say that's going to be easier? Then for the next couple of years, have a serious conversation, sit down and decide how we're going to split up the assets and how we're going to share the debts. And then be done with it. And then be done with it. That's what the benefit of national divorce is. We can have a couple of years where we're going to sit down and agree to disagree and come to an agreement and come to one final settlement, a divorce settlement. And we split up the assets, we share the debts, and we peacefully part ways, and then we are done with it. Then we're done with it. The alternative is for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, just keep fighting and bickering and protesting and marching and always be in high alert because the Supreme Court's going to issue some ruling on something sometime. And then every election, every presidential election is going to be the most important election in your lifetime. That's the other alternative. Is that easier? Is that really easier than just sitting down one last time and having a serious conversation? Say, hey, folks, like Biden says, folks, we don't like each other. We don't agree on much, but let's just put that behind us now. We're going to come to terms on the point that we're going to separate. And once we come up with this agreement, we're going to split up the assets. We're going to split up the debts. And then when we come to that agreement, we part ways and we never have to deal with each other again when it comes to domestic affairs. And then we're done. If it takes 2 years, if it takes 5 years, it's still going to be less time and less work and less effort than for eternity, as some people believe the United States will last forever, to just continue to fight about everything. So I think we can answer this question. A couple of years of debate, a couple of years of national discussion, and we will have a framework for national divorce. Let's get on with it. Let's go on to and see what the author continues to say here. Just as contempt ruins a marriage, it can tear a country apart. That's true. So again, so far this article is a little bit lopsided in favor of arguments in favor of national divorce. But hey, freedom of the press, right? You can write whatever he wants to write. That's not to say we don't have huge problems that we have that are dividing us, albeit across cultural, not Mason-Dixon lines. So he's talking about here the fact that our problems, like I was talking about before, are about core values, about our way of life, and not because of geographical lines. And that's why I wrote about it on my blog at louismarinelli.com, is that the national divorce settlement doesn't have to have the states dividing up along the existing state lines. That wouldn't make any sense. Because even if you look at, for example, California, we have a very big divide, geographically speaking, actually, in California, between where the conservatives live and between where the progressives and the liberals live. And so it would make no sense for California to do a Calexit, in my personal opinion, to take a Calexit out of the United States through national divorce and then take, all those Republican conservative counties in the north part of the state with us and say, hey, bad luck. You got to go with us now. And now you're stuck in another blue country that doesn't represent your values. Doesn't make any sense. We got to give everybody the chance to have a country that represents their values. We got to give everybody the chance. And it can't be just California saying, well, because California has a majority of Democrats, and most of the voters are Democrats in California. It's a blue state that we're just going to leave as a unified state, and then we're just going to say to the Republicans and the Democrats and the other political parties that are represented in state government in California that, hey, you don't like it, lump it. I mean, they can't do that. That's not a faithful exercise of self-determination. California leaves, and those counties that are part of California now that want to stay a part of the union or join another separating state like Oregon or Nevada should be able to do that. And that's what he's talking about here, that this is not about Mason-Dixon lines and that we can just divide the country based on existing state lines like what generally happened during the Civil War, where they broke away as a state. But the divisions that we have in this country right now are not really like they were back then in the 1800s, where it was about state loyalty or pride in one state, and that you had some sense of civic pride and nationalism for your state. You know, if you were from Alabama or you're from Georgia, or you're from South Carolina, that's where your home was. And so you wanted to fight for that political entity. But now the divides are urban and countryside. Now the divides are cultural, ideological, religious. And there are no clear lines to divide there, but we can make those lines. We can make the lines in a way that makes sense. We can put data together we have modern technology, 21st century. We can put geographic data together on maps and say, hey, let's look at the results of the past decade or so of state assembly election districts, state senate election districts, congressional districts, county level elections, elections for U.S. senators. We can see who's voting for who in what areas of the states, and so we can get a better picture about where is red America, where is blue America. And then we can try to start making some lines that are going to make sense, but inevitably we're going to end up with people, so to speak, behind enemy lines. There's inevitably going to be those people who are, for example, that Trump supporter in Hollywood in his MAGA hat walking down the street. He's going to end up behind enemy lines, so to speak. And there are going to be, those bleeding heart liberals up in Shasta County, or those bleeding heart liberals in other red parts of the country. They're going to be stuck behind enemy lines. But that brings us to a point that these opponents of national divorce keep bringing up as well, is that because of that fact, it's not possible. Well, it is possible because there's something called migration, politically motivated migration. And we've seen it throughout all of human history. We see it now with people leaving California in droves for political reasons, because they want to have lower taxes, lower property taxes, freedom of choice in schools when it comes to, curriculum and vaccines, for example. And so they're moving to Idaho, or they're moving to Texas, or they're moving to Tennessee or South Carolina because of those political reasons. And they're not the first ones to do that. They're just the current ones to be doing that. Let's not forget about the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims came to America in the 1600s in search of religious freedom. That's politically motivated migration. The settlers who came after them that established 13 colonies and so on and so forth, they also came to North America, to the New World from Europe in search of, freedom of religion and freedom from political persecution. That was politically motivated migration, and they came across the ocean in a wooden ship for months at a time. So this idea now that although people are already doing it now, they're getting in their cars, they're renting U-Haul trucks, and traveling from California to Texas, that after this national breakup that we're not going to be able to figure out if we really wanted to, how somebody who gets left behind enemy lines, so to speak, is not going to be able to pick up and go to another state. I think that's another ridiculous point. But I don't know so far if Mr. Lewis brings that point up, but the other ones have, and I think it's a false argument. But let's see what he says here. Let's see what he says. Because, yes, America does have profound disagreements on some basic issues here. This is what he says here. The left and the right have profound disagreements over values and basic facts about the nation's history, religion, the nature of biological sex, and even the winner of last year's presidential election. So like I said it earlier, these are some of the issues that we're divided upon. We're not divided upon a tax rate. We're divided upon, we don't agree upon what the nation's history is. It's absolutely true. There's completely different versions of the nation's history, that depending on your ideological leanings, you may believe one story or another. And the opposite story is, of course, it's going to be considered in your book as revisionism. There's heavy debates about religion and the role of, religion in government and the separation of church and state, morality, etc. There's debates about biology in our society and other scientific issues as well, like climate change. I mean, there are some scientific issues that are, well, your position on what you believe about that science really depends upon your ideological leaning. It could be something about the effectiveness of wearing a mask. It could be something about the safety of the vaccines. It could be something about LGBT and transgender rights and parenting abilities. It could be something about the transgender use of the bathrooms, etc. So there's so many different issues that are scientific, really, in nature. But we have such a political division about them. And it really relies upon one's political leanings to determine where you stand on that issue. So we're not going to be able to come to an agreement on these points. We're not going to be able to sit down and say, let's work this out. And in California, you can believe the American story is ABC, and in Texas will believe that the American story is XYZ, and that somehow we'll have some kind of common national identity by doing that. How do you have a national identity as a united country when people in the different states have different understandings of the nation's history and its foundation and its principles? But that basic commonality would be absolutely necessary if we were, as the author says, stay together for the sake of the kids. Because you'd have to have that common goal, that common vision about who you are and what you represent in order to kind of get beyond those other issues that you're bickering about. But we're bickering about what the history of the country is, whether we should take statues down because a president from 150 or 200 years ago may have had slaves or not. Or somebody might have said something that was, that in today's world is defined as racist. We're going to take their statue down and remove them from history. I mean, those are the debates that are happening in our society. And we're not going to be able to find common ground on those points. So contempt in the country runs deep. And it's tearing the country apart because the things that we are debating about, they're causing a lot of animosity in society. A lot of animosity in society. And so we can't say that, we have a political disagreement. We go to a protest, some decision is made, and then we go about our lives and we forget it, put it behind us. It doesn't happen. This is all boiling up inside. And like some authors have said in reference to the national divorce situation, the country is like a powder keg. Or you can make the analogy about the frog sitting in the water, slowly boiling to death. Things are heating up. If you may have seen a couple days ago when Donald Trump went to Iowa and had his rally there because he's getting ready to run for president in 2024, one of the attendees there said on TV that she thinks the Civil War is on its way. That she's preparing for civil war. There are other people preparing for civil war, buying guns and ammunition in preparation for the next civil war. Is that easier? Should we stay together for the sake of the kids so that we can have a civil war? I mean, that would be the equivalent of staying together for the sake of the kids and having the kids live in a house that's full of domestic violence. Is that really in the kids' interest? I mean, the author here is saying, let's stay together, if even just for the sake of the kids. But we're getting to a point where we're going to be seeing violence, more violence in our streets, because we already know that we have politically motivated violence in this country. And then it's being tallied, and it's growing. We call them extremist groups right now. The left have their revolutionaries, and maybe they're throwing Molotov cocktails at some government building up in Oregon, and you have on the right side, you have these armed militias, fighting against the Bureau of Land Management in Nevada. And so, that's a true story. These are true examples. And so those are kind of categorized as extremists right now. But as these situations continue to get worse, and more leftists are called to the cause of these extremists on the left, and more conservatives are called to the cause of the extremists on the right. No longer is it extreme if everybody's doing it. I mean, it's not going to be extreme. At some point, it's not going to be extreme. It's going to be mainstream. And when it becomes mainstream, there's your civil war for you. And so staying together for the sake of the kids is like having a married couple who hate each other, staying together for the sake of the kids, and then having them live in a household full of domestic violence. It's not what's good for the kids. In that case, it would be better for them to divorce and to co-parent living in separate homes. And that's what we're talking about with national divorce. Let's go on with his article. Breaking up is hard to do. In our case, it's stupid. So let's stay together, even if it's for the sake of the kids. How can we do that? Okay, so now we're going to get his grand plan on how we're going to sidestep all these problems and all this hostility and animosity in our society. We're going to get his great plan now. Okay, what do we do? First step, we have to try. First step, we have to try. According to Harvard professor Arthur Brooks, there is no evidence that in a marriage, anger is correlated with separation or divorce. Rather, citing social psychologist and relationship expert John Gottman's study of the thousands of married couples, he says, quote, the biggest warning signs for divorce are indicators of contempt. These include sarcasm, sneering, hostile humor, and worst of all, eye rolling. Okay, so eye rolling is the key. Brooks believes that these principles of marriage and divorce actually also apply to nations. Just as contempt ruins a marriage, he warns, it can tear a country apart. Well, I totally agree with that. I think the difference of opinion that I have with Mr. Lewis, who wrote this article for the Daily Beast, is that he fails to recognize that we have contempt in America. We're not just angry at each other. Like, as this paragraph implies, that, it's not anger that leads to divorce. It's the sarcasm, sneering, the hostile humor, and the eye rolling. Well, he says it right here. I think it's safe to say there's a lot of eye rolling going on in America today. Are you making an argument about staying together, Mr. Lewis, or are you making an argument for national divorce? Because on every point, it seems to be you are conceding that the recipe is ripe for national divorce. This contempt is stoked by Twitter and cable news, relatively modern technological innovations. However, we can individually commit to building relationships and filtering out the toxic information and refusing to hate our fellow Americans despite our profound disagreements. I mean, it sounds great. It really does. I mean, that would be the ideal, which is why I was calling him an idealist in the beginning. I mean, it sounds pretty great that if we could somehow, commit to building relationships and filter out the toxic information and refuse to hate our fellow Americans despite our profound disagreements, then we could somehow manage to stay together. Well, I don't think we can do that. And I think that many people accept that we can't do that. That we can't just commit to building relationships and filtering out toxic information. Let's not forget that, Americans, people in general, ignore toxic information that they disagree with. Or the information that they disagree with, they consider to be toxic. Or they disagree with, or they ignore information in general that doesn't affirm what they already believe. And so Mr. Lewis here at the Daily Beast thinks that we can somehow build relationships and filter out toxic information, and we can't even agree upon what the toxic information is. we have fact checkers out there on social media that half the country thinks are more in the business of censorship than fact checking. So Mr. Lewis is saying would be valid in a society that doesn't have contempt for one another to the point where we don't trust the fact checkers and we have two diametrically opposed opinions on what constitutes toxic information. I mean, if we could agree upon, okay, we have a definition of toxic information and we're going to filter that out, then yeah, that one might work. The plan might work. But both sides are going to have the opposite opinion on what constitutes toxic information. And either side is going to, listen to the other and take information in that contradicts their pre-existing opinion and say, you know what? Hey, I was wrong. And now that I've taken this information in with an open mind and I've sat down and I've considered it, then I've changed my mind. That doesn't happen in our society. It doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen because we're living in a dysfunctional household. And that's the source of the hate that we have for one another, is that we're stuck living in this dysfunctional household. We're at each other's throats. We can't get out of the house. And so, of course, when you're in that type of environment, the animosity and the anger and the contempt is going to rise and rise and rise. And like I said, this is a powder keg. The frog is in the water, and the water is heating up. We need to have a national divorce before that frog gets boiled, before that powder keg explodes, before the civil war begins in our streets, because it won't be a civil war between armies meeting on a battlefield in Virginia. It'll be a war between neighbors in the streets. Is that going to be easier and cleaner than just going through this national divorce process? A couple of years of difficult negotiations, come to some agreement, national divorce settlement, and then peacefully part ways and be done with each other. And be done with each other. That's the key. That's the key. And the other parts of this author's article really rely upon the idea that we're going to somehow live and let live. Like as if America was this ultra libertarian country where we just all believe in live and let live. Libertarians do. I generally do, but the rest of the country doesn't. If we as a country supported or believed in the idea of live and let live, we wouldn't be in the streets protesting everything that happens every day. So this author, again, somehow detached from reality because he thinks that somehow we can just, if we just say that we're going to do it, we can just agree to disagree and adopt a live and let live mentality and restore federalism to its previous greatness. Make federalism great again. Maybe that should be the article's title for the Daily Beast. Make federalism great again. Because, and I agree, if we had a federal system that worked, where the states could live and let live, then we wouldn't need a national divorce. Because we could have a situation where the people of Texas and people of California could have completely different political systems and cultural identities and value systems, and they wouldn't interfere with each other's domestic affairs. That's what we're trying to achieve. Well, we can't achieve that within the current system because the current system is broken and dysfunctional and doesn't work. And yet this author at the Daily Beast thinks that we could just decide that we're going to not hate each other anymore. We're just going to decide that we're going to adopt a mentality of live and let live, but that's not a part of the American system now, is it? Now, it might be part of the American system up in places like Vermont and New Hampshire. I know that the culture up there is more libertarian, live and let live. But then everywhere else in the country. And particularly not where those big political and cultural divisions exist, like between California and Texas. If Texas, and I've witnessed it, Texas has passed laws in the past that, for example, restricted abortion, and Californians are up in arms about that. Because they want to defend a woman's right to have medical autonomy over her body. Now, whether that's right or wrong, I'm not taking a position right now. I'm simply saying that that's the reality. And that Texas passed a law that restricts a woman's right to have access to an abortion, and the people in California and the people in Seattle and Chicago and New York, they're up in arms about it. Or some other state passes a law within their own state that says that they're not going to allow transgender citizens to use the bathroom that they identify with. And as a result, what happens? California bans official state travel to that state to make some kind of virtual signal about how much they support the transgender community. So in that context, does this author really believe that we're just going to adopt the live and let live mentality? The California is going to start saying, well, South Carolina, or what was it, North Carolina is not going to allow transgender persons to use the bathroom that they most identify with. So therefore, well, it's not our business. It's North Carolina. We're just going to live and let live. It's just too hopeful. It's too idealistic. It's just too detached from reality, Mr. Lewis. And he gets in talking about his own ideas here, his own examples about that, about what's happening in San Francisco, 1,000 miles away. Nobody should care about it. And I agree. Nobody should care about it. And you know what? If we have a national divorce, nobody will care about it because it's no longer going to be their country. And there's not going to be the fear of the so goes California, so goes the nation type thing. Where, oh, California is doing something that they consider to be crazy, and they're scared and afraid that that's gonna creep their way into their state. That's what the core of the issue is. But if we have a national divorce and these are different countries, there's going to be an extra layer there of protection from these states so that we don't have to worry about, oh, as so goes California, so goes the nation. Or as goes Texas, so goes the nation. Because you're going to have less influence on each other's domestic affairs. They're not going to be under the umbrella of a single Supreme Court that can make a decision for everybody. They're not going to be under the influence and the jurisdiction of one Senate and House of Representatives that could hold up progress with a single vote in the Senate through the filibuster for everybody. Now, for example, right now we have the Build Back Better plan for Biden. Can't get through, can't get passed. Why can't it get passed? They have a majority in the House. They have, with Kamala Harris as VP, they have a majority in the Senate. They have the White House. Why can't they get Biden's signature legislation through? Well, that is a whole different conversation that could be held there. But the point to be made is that progress cannot be made on the national level because the system is broken in one way or another. So that brings us to conservative governing philosophy that could help us all get along and mind our own business. Federalism. Yeah, so here's where he comes in talking about making federalism great again. Please, tell me more about restoring federalism. I'd like to hear how that's just going to happen. Again, how are we just going to restore it? It's just going to be, we're just going to make it work. I mean, this is very vague descriptions about what we're going to do here. Philosophy here. Federalism. That's right. The idea that the federal government should have a broad but limited role in our lives, and while states and localities should oversee our day-to-day existence. Okay, so thank you for reminding us what federalism is. We learned that in social studies in 10th grade. Okay, thank you for the reminder. It would allow for healthy boundaries to be enforced and yet provide adequate space to head off heated arguments. The equivalent of a man cave and she shed for America. Okay, I can agree with that. I mean, I am a supporter of federalism. The problem is that federalism in our country no longer exists. It no longer exists. It doesn't work. We have a federal government which has expanded its power through its abuse and its creative interpretation of things like the elastic clause, the necessary and proper clause, the commerce clause. When Congress wants to make a law, they don't have the authority for it in the Constitution. They create, a legislation under the umbrella of the Commerce Clause. Oh, now this has something to do with commerce. So we're going to, argue that we have jurisdiction to make this law because it has something, somehow, somewhere to do with commerce. And we have the right to regulate commerce. And so they start to get creative and imaginative with their interpretation of what commerce is in order to justify them passing any legislation they want to do. That's not federalism. It's not federalism when the federal government can pass any law it wants under a vague, abstract interpretation of the Elastic and Commerce Clause. Then that's just the Congress. The Congress then uses that power to empower federal agencies across the whole federal apparatus to regulate lives, regulate businesses, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, other mandates, tax structures. The EPA goes in there and does regulations, although it doesn't have the constitutional authority to do so. That's because the Congress gave them the authority to do that through these imaginative and expansive interpretations of their enumerated powers in the Constitution. The Constitution gives the federal government 18 enumerated powers. And one of those is the Elastic Clause. It gives them the power to make any laws that are necessary and proper for executing their 18 enumerated powers, one of which is the Commerce Clause. So they combine the Elastic Clause, which gives them the ability to pass laws that are necessary and proper for carrying out their authority, with the Commerce Clause, which gives them the authority to regulate commerce. They put those two together, they regulate basically anything that they set their heart on. That's not federalism, and that's not going to end. And so the idea that we can just return somehow, jurisdiction back to the states, although a wonderful idea, is just not realistic. This article continues to be so detached from reality that we are going in spin circles now. If people in, say, Texas want to live in a different state of rules, governed differently than the people of California, let them. Let them. I didn't know it was that simple. All we have to do is let them. And then things will be fine. Again, yeah, it would be great. But as I've said, and as I've explained, nobody's going to let anybody do anything. We do not have a live and let live society in America. And when Texas bans abortion, or Texas bans, LGBT rights in some way, or hinders LGBT rights in some way, Californians are going to stand up and protest that. Ban travel to the state, boycotts, etc. So we don't have a live and let live mentality. Although I would argue to some extent that the left is more to blame for that than the right, because most of the time when you see these, interferences or these protests about what another state is doing, although to a lesser extent now, but it certainly has historically been the left that's been standing up against those things because they think it reflects some kind of step backwards away from progress. And that can be rightfully or wrongfully, but generally speaking, what we've seen is that a red state, conservative state, passes some legislation, makes some kind of decision for themselves and their people, and then, California or New York stands up and complains about it. So if we want to have a live and let live society, we need to recognize that, well, most of the people I think that are not really willing to have a live and let live mentality, it's mostly people on the left. So let's continue. We're almost done here. Now, there's that famous quote about if you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, you must be insane. And so that's what this article is really, I guess, suggesting that we do. It says divorce is stupid. Instead of that, let's give each other some courtesy, some grace, and some breathing room. Let's quit worrying so much about everyone doing what we want them to do. Let's find a way to get along. In the long run, it'll be easier, cheaper, and a lot less messy. So, I mean, I think we've tried that, is the point I'm trying to make here. We've tried that over the last decades, because this isn't just come up now. This division in our society isn't a product of the last year or 2 years or the pandemic or Donald Trump. Donald Trump was a symptom of this broken system and this division in our society. And so this has been going on for decades. I remember when I was very young, first grade, second grade, somewhere in that area, my father telling me the country was going down the tubes. And that was 3 decades ago. And so things haven't gotten better since then. They've gotten worse. Now we're having a national conversation about national divorce. And if that's happening right now, that it's in and of itself is representative of the fact that things are not getting better. And that we're not going to be able to just kind of look the other way, give some courtesy, grace, and breathing room, and quit worrying about so much what everyone else is doing. And we're not going to be able to find a way to get along because we've already reached the point where we're talking about a national divorce on a large scale. And that means that people recognize that they're tired. They're tired of the fighting. So it's not that the will's not there to have peace, but it's that people don't want to compromise their core values to obtain it. And peace and tranquility in society. And so if we're going to want to have peace and tranquility in society, which should be the ultimate goal, and we don't want to have to force people to compromise their values, we have to recognize that we can no longer live under the same house. We have to recognize that the only result and the only real answer to that situation, where we can both have maintain our core values, both sides can maintain their core values, and we can have tranquility in North America, is through national divorce. And the author here says that staying together would be cheaper, easier, and less messy. Than what? Than civil war? Because that's where we're headed. American society is headed towards the next civil war. It may not be tomorrow or this year, but as political extremism continues to expand, and it has, on the left and the right, that extremism is going to become mainstreamism. And then we're going to have extremism is going to be mainstream on the left and the right. People are going to start getting hurt. People are going to start getting targeted based on their ideological beliefs. And that is going to be a civil war in the open streets. We're not going to have the states fighting each other like in the 1860s. It's not going to be, the California National Guard versus the Arizona National Guard. It's going to be Californians amongst themselves. It's going to be Arizonans amongst themselves. And that is the area that's the area we're going into in our country's history. Unless we go through national divorce, and we can avoid that through national divorce. And so this author at the Daily Beast in his article says that, staying together would be, in the long run, easier, cheaper, and a lot less messy. I don't agree with that. I believe that civil war is not easier, cheaper, and a lot less messy than a national divorce. And I believe that the national divorce settlement can be reached within a couple of years of some serious discussions and negotiations, and we can peacefully part ways. And we can restore tranquility in North America. And that the independent countries that result from the national divorce can work together. Just like Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic work together today, although they used to be one country. They even have a national and international mutual defense agreement amongst them. So the North American countries can do that too, because we're going to be out of each other's hair. And we're going to not be interfering with each other's domestic affairs. And that's going to give us the ability, as the author was saying, to give each other some space. That's what this national divorce is about giving each other some space and live and let live, and so on and so forth. Because if we're not interfering with each other's domestic affairs and interfering and trying to force a set of values or cultural values upon the other, then we're going to have less to be at each other's throats about, less to debate, less to argue about. And then the animosity will subside through time. And then we will have the ability to come together as several independent countries and find common ground on the international stage on issues that we can still, as American brothers and sisters, agree on, whether it be support of democracy around the world, whether it be combating climate change around the world, whether it be putting pressure on China to improve their human rights record. We can work on those issues as international countries because I believe that the American brothers and sisters have some common ground when it comes to those principles. But we certainly don't have much common ground left when it comes to domestic issues. And that's why we need a national divorce. That's it for today with this episode of the California Secessionist. My name is Louis Marinelli. I went through this article, as I've been doing this week about other articles, going through the critics' arguments against national divorce and reminding people that they never have an argument in favor of the union itself. Their arguments always look outward. Their arguments always say it's not possible because of X, Y, Z, but they never say it's necessary and a good idea to stay together as a union simply because the union itself is good and that the federal government works for the people and that our elections are, people have faith in our elections and that people have faith in our politicians and our government institutions. I mean, it's none of it. That's not the argument that they make. And so I guess before I'll go, I'll choose a comment here and put it up here and try to answer it. If California leaves the union, what would the politics be? Would there be a reset? Well, if California leaves the union, I think that the politics in California would be very similar to what the politics are now. The people would be more free to enact the public policy preferences that those politics call for. We would, as a country, be able to take actions now on issues that we're not free to do so. For example, and again, I'm not expressing my personal view on the issue, but for example, many Californians are generally supportive of more restrictive gun control legislation. Yet we in California cannot do that to the extent that many Californians would like to, simply because of the Second Amendment and the Supreme Court's rulings on the right of gun ownership. By the way, there's another gun ownership lawsuit at the Supreme Court now, and we're going to get a ruling for them in the spring, which is likely to expand the right of people to carry firearms. That's going to further limit California's ability to enact the type of policies that Californians would like to see in California. And that's going to be because the Supreme Court, 3,000 miles away in Washington, D.C., made up of justices appointed by Republican governors that don't reflect, Republican presidents that don't reflect the values of California, said so. The Supreme Court's going to potentially, in the spring, overturn Roe versus Wade, which Californians, of course, majority of which believe that a woman has the right to choose and should have medical autonomy over her body to do what she feels is necessary to make that decision for herself. What happens when the federal government said that there is no longer a nationwide right to an abortion? Very possible to happen. So when the question comes to if California leaves the union, what would the politics be? I think the politics would very much stay the same, but we'd be more liberated to do the type of things that we would like to do, but we can't because we're constrained by the Constitution, by the Second Amendment, for example, by the conservative Supreme Court. And so would there be a reset? Not sure what that refers to, but I, for sure, could speak about one thing. I know that California is an independent country if I'm elected governor. Even before we become an independent country, I am going to advocate for a reform of the Sacramento government so that there is proportional representation in the state legislature. So that it's not just Democrats and Republicans. And it's not just one party ruled by the Democrats, because the Republicans don't offer a real alternative in California. But we're going to have proportional representation in the state assembly and the state senate, in the legislature. So that political parties across California, there are many, they're not just two, can all have representation in Sacramento. I think this is an issue of civil rights. I think it's an issue of protecting minority rights. California is very proud of protecting minority rights. Well, we don't do much to protect political minorities. And by that, I mean Republicans, members of the Green Party, Peace and Freedom Party, for example, all of those are political minorities in California, and they have little to no representation in government. Now, the Republicans have some representation, but the Green Party has very little to no representation in the state government. Peace and Freedom Party has, I think, no representation in the state government. And so should it be the case that just because you and your party of preference lose an election, you have forfeited your right to representation in government? I don't think so. Well, the only reason you're losing those elections is because we're using the American system of first past the post, which says that the person who gets 50.1% of the vote wins and everyone else loses. So what that literally means is that in an election, you could have a candidate from one party get 50.1% of the vote, and a candidate from the other party gets 49.9% of the vote, and that 49% of the population that voted for the losing candidate, they have no representation in government until the next election, if they win it. I don't believe that should be the case. I don't believe that should be the case. And I think that California ought to do more to protect political minorities. And we can do that by instituting a system of proportional representation in the state assembly, the state senate, the legislature overall, so that even if you don't get 50% of the vote, and you don't, quote unquote, win the election, you still get a share of the vote. You get a proportional amount of that in the state legislature. And that will allow for more participation in the system because people will believe that it works and that it represents them. Because right now, if you're a voter in the Green Party, the Peace and Freedom Party, you may very well not like the Democrats or the Republicans. That's why you've registered in the Green Party, for example. You don't think that the Democrats or the Republicans represent your values. So now you may be disenfranchised, not interested in participating in the system. But you may vote anyway. And many times you may end up voting for the Democrat because it's a little bit closer to your value system than the Republicans are. So that helps the Democrats maintain their one-party rule. When they're not only getting the Democrats to vote for them, but they're also getting the members of the smaller third parties to vote for them. That doesn't force them to moderate their platform or to change their form of governance. But if we have proportional representation in the state legislature, and we had a block of Green Party members in the state legislature, and a block of representatives of other political parties in the state legislature, it may just force the Democrats to form a coalition in the legislature in order to have majority. And that would force them to moderate their governance. That would force them to moderate their platform in order to have that coalition form and govern the state of California. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities for a reset, a political reset in California, but I don't think it's going to change the general philosophical and ideological position of the state. But I think that there are opportunities for a reset, especially if we choose to elect someone who is prepared to stand up and offer some real changes. Gavin Newsom is the ultimate status quo candidate. I mean, I call him the what's it called? The one-star wonder governor of California. One-hit wonder. Because 17 years ago, he was the mayor of San Francisco. He did one thing that gained him some notoriety. And he was the mayor of San Francisco, and he defied the law, and he stood up for the rights of same-sex couples to get married. That's a good thing. I support it. That was 17 years ago. What has he done since then? He's done nothing. He's been riding that same rainbow wave since 2004 all the way to 2021. He thinks he's going to ride to the White House. What else has Gavin Newsom done except for just be Gavin Newsom, the guy who in 2004 stood up for the rights of same-sex couples to get married? So Gavin Newsom is the ultimate status quo candidate. And if we put forth a candidate that's going to offer the people of California a real difference, and not just put up some Republican who's going to parrot the same Republican talking points that they parrot every time and that they lose with every time, I don't think Gavin Newsom will stand a chance, because the people of California want to see change. And the people of California believe in independence. And I know that personally because I've traveled around the state And I've had our tent up talking about California independence, and people generally agree that this would be a great idea. They just don't believe it's possible. But if we convince people that it's possible, it's going to be the biggest bandwagon in political history. The only thing that's keeping people from outright supporting Calexit is the fact that they don't think that it's possible. So they don't want to put their energy into it. They don't want to donate to it because of that. And that makes sense. Why donate to something you don't think is going to happen anyway, even if it's a wonderful idea? But we can make it happen. And if we elect a candidate who supports Calexit and the national divorce, then we will make it happen. And that's why I'm running for governor in 2022. That's why I'm returning to California to run for governor in 2022. My name is Louis Marinelli. I'm ending this episode now of the California Secessionist. We'll be back in a couple of days to talk about what else is happening in the news. Hopefully, we're still talking about national divorce because it is the most important conversation for us to have right now. And I look forward to coming back to California, traveling the state up and down, left and right, sharing the message of Calexit and national divorce and why it's necessary for our future, and to paint a picture of what an independent California will look like after national divorce and after Calexit. Take a look if you can. Subscribe on the YouTube. Subscribe on the Twitter. You can click the like button on Facebook. Stay informed. Stay aware of what we're talking about here. You can see my social media links right there. I'll be talking every day or so or every other day or so about these issues because we have a lot of work to do, a lot of work ahead of us, and we need someone who's going to go out there and talk about it. And so if it's not going to be anybody else, why not be me? Louis Marinelli, have a nice day, California.